So with our lovely Mr. M, we're going to warm up with a couple little find its. I'm just letting him kind of drag the gear for now. Ready, Max? So that way he can kind of just get comfortable sometimes wearing the leash even while we're practicing. So I've noticed that sometimes the gear starts to get him really excited. So I want to make sure that gear doesn't always equal like a woohoo moment all the time, because then your puppy can start to get in the groove of every time you grab for equipment, they start to excessively bark and whine and maybe even mouth. So, ready, Max? Yes. So if you're finding Mr. M at times can get really easily excited, I would start practicing sometimes grabbing for gear. Ready, sit? Yes, grabbing for gear and ready, find it, and then have it be one of those moments where equipment doesn't instantly equal we're going outside, we're going for a walk, we're going for a car ride. Because if, for example, ready, Max? If, for example, those items always tend to equal jazzed or overexcited, then we might be by accident reinforcing the wildness that we weren't such a huge fan of. So this doesn't mean I don't want my puppy to get excited or happy about certain things. Ready, Max? Yes, but I want him to think that there might be value in sometimes being able to come back from that arousal or that moment of excitement. It's a nice job, sir. So we're gonna go and see if we can do a little bit with our loose leash walk-in. So with Mr. M, if you're finding that, again, you were saying that he does tend to pull, remember that your walks shouldn't be about where you're trying to get, but more the quality of them for both him and for you. So if you're finding that loose leash walking is something he hasn't quite mastered in certain bubbles, then try to avoid those setups where he is learning how not to walk on gear. So I know that sounds easier said than done, but remember that going for a walk, if your puppy is, again, working on skills you're not a huge fan of, that becomes the behaviors or the setup that your puppy is going to get really good at. So for Mr. M, when he feels a little bit of that pull, I want to see if I can get him to bounce back from that forward motion back towards me. So this ability to kind of rotate and head back towards my direction would be another great venue for him to work on that redirection from distraction. So again, right now we're just kind of meandering. Nice, what a good boy. So if he, again, is doing so nice, make sure that you start to slowly generalize these skills. So if, let's say, his best environment, oh, good job. If his best environment tends to be inside the home and maybe the backyard or a certain side section of your yard, stick to those bubbles for now. And then maybe you go and do a nice little sniffy walk and mix it up a little bit. So sniff walks, for example, are definitely very important. We want to make sure that it's not always about a heel position next to the handler. Though, again, remember, loose leash walking or getting your puppy to be nearby is a really good life skill. So right here, if he pulls ahead, yes, nice job. We want him to, again, be able to do a little bit of both. So loose leash walking should be softness on the equipment as you're meandering together. It doesn't have to be a pristine heel, though he's doing a really nice job with these beautiful check-ins. But if, let's say, for example, we always want that version, that's a lot of really hard work for a lot of puppies. And we don't want them to think that the only time we maybe move forward is when we're very much so stuck in heel. His walk should also consist of some nice sniff moments, exploration. Getting to be a pup, yeah, is very important. Good job, Max. Because if, let's say, he's not allowed to go sniff the environment, I know we've chatted about this, where being able to smell where he is also gives him a lot of great moments to calm down, get to feel out the environment. And then also, oh my goodness, if we get a little excited, we're just going to keep moving. He just says, I really like to keep working. So I don't want him to think that woo-wooing is going to give him an instant paycheck, because then by accident he might think, if I bark and then she checks in with me or says, you know, something else, maybe it might be a great moment to feed the bark by mistake. Yes. Good job. He's like, that's the cheese Dad brought. Oh, good. He does like that one. Delicious. Ready? So I know you had mentioned that at times, ready, Max? He uses a martingale collar. Martingale collars, which are the type that tighten and relax enough so the puppy's head can't slip out, can be an okay backup, but I don't recommend it as your everyday training collar. And the reason behind that is you'll see that sometimes when puppies get excited or overwhelmed, they do tend to pull into their gear, which means that a lot of that very hard pull, he's like, the heat just came on, is a lot of that really strong drive, ready Max, will end up going into their neck. Dogs' necks are actually even thinner when it comes to the amount of cells that are in the skin cells. So when people say, oh, dogs' necks are much more durable, they're much stronger, they have pretty much the same design as us, and the skin is actually even thinner than ours. Ready? Max. So I highly recommend view it like if he's failing, he doesn't either understand what you're asking or the environment is just too stimulating for him to be successful. That was very nice. Good job checking in. Right? So, but if we're looking to gear to change behavior, what's tending to happen is the gear tends to work if it's uncomfortable. So what I mean by that is, for example, a neck collar that tightens could, for example, become a little bit overwhelming for the puppy. And since they don't like the feeling of it tightening, or they get nervous about if it has a chain, the noise factor, then you might be startling the puppy out of behavior, but not actually showing them what you'd rather. Also, if your babe is unable to take food while they're out practicing, just like I mentioned from a Z, is then your babe is actually not learning new skills, but is technically rehearsing the skills that you maybe don't want them to get good at, because that's the only thing that is attainable from their perspective. So ready, Max? So right now he's getting much more comfortable. He's taking the food off the floor. He's doing a real nice job. But if we look to equipment, ready, front, to do what we want it, so let's say, for example, no pulling, the problem there is then you might always need that gear to stop the pull. But what ends up happening to most students is if you start off with a tool that restricts motion or restricts airflow or feels uncomfortable, that becomes the only reason the puppy maybe responds in the beginning. But a lot of puppies, ready, Max, start to blow through pressure, which means that in the beginning, the collar was maybe working when he first felt it. But as the walk continues and as he keeps practicing pulling into that piece of equipment, he might start to blow through it the way he might blow through the harness at right now. So, but blowing through a harness, which means he pulls and he puts pressure and he still goes, still means that yes, he's again rocking the pull. But remember, harnesses don't create more pulling or teach pulling. Pulling teaches pulling. So if, let's say, he starts to haul now on the collar, he's going to also potentially cause trachea damage. You could also create a collapsed trachea. His thyroid glands are also located in the neck area. And then for some dogs, remember how I mentioned earlier with Ms. Z, is that 80% of reactivity cases stem from a place of uncomfortable or discomfort or pain. So if, let's say, for example, we do a lot of jostling by mistake, like he pulls because he saw a squirrel, he pulls because he saw the neighbor, or he all of a sudden clotheslines himself with the collar, he can cause himself some spinal or neck injuries, which maybe he hides really well, but then behavior could start to escalate because now he feels ow every time he gets overwhelmed by pulling on the gear. So if your babe tends to pull, I'd recommend get him comfortable that when he feels tension, it means to check in or do a little U-turn. So right now, let's say Mr. M is working a little bit with his loose leash walking. Let's say he gets ahead of me and he starts to pull. I would get him in the habit of being able to turn and pivot into me and feed for those moments. Then you could always restart your walk, ready with me, and you could continue on your merry way and feed intermittently, nice, throughout this loose leash walking. So I want it to be where the food happens is again by the side of your leg to help build up that this is the right place to be. Nice job, Mr. M. He's like, oh, I'm getting so tired from all my loop-de-loops. Nice. So if again, gear is the reason why the puppy may be not pulling, what ends up happening, like I was sort of getting into earlier, ready, sit, is that then the puppy starts to blow through the collar and then you have to step to the next harder equipment to try to make them respond to that. The trouble is then a lot of times too, is I like to practice as if my puppy wasn't wearing gear. So I go with the most benign piece, which is a harness that doesn't affect movement and is non-restrictive. So typically I recommend like a Y-shaped harness. His seems to be a nice fit and seems to not bother him. So I'd say this is a fine option for Mr. M. But we want to make sure that if, let's say, Mr. M is having a hard time, is that the gear, again, if it's always the thing creating the behavior, what happens when the gear isn't on? So I like to practice as if he's like, ooh, shopping, I like to practice as if the babe was naked, if that makes sense. And this is on just for safety reasons, just like training wheels would be on for while you're riding your bicycle. Yes. But if, let's say, I slapped on training wheels, like for my little human, and she doesn't know how to steer, how to stop, how to pedal, it doesn't matter if she has training wheels or not, she's still gonna maybe fall or hurt herself with the bicycle. So view your gear as your training wheels, like your leash and your body harness, but you have to teach them how to turn, how to pedal, how to stop. So when on equipment, we are reinforcing the moments we want our puppies, nice job, to be near us or checking in or being by our sides or slowing down. So let's say he gets a little ahead, we get him to go to the end of the gear. Let's say he feels it right there, yes. And I feed for that little moment of leash pressure where he pulls into it. When he feels it, it means come check in, not you're in trouble. So really nice job, Mr. M. Ready? So he says, oh, the heat is on. There's all the funny trains going by. What a nice job. Ready, Max? Such a good boy. You're so handsome. Ready? Front. Nice. Good boy. So what a smart man. He's like, oh my goodness, so tired. Ready? We'll do another little lap. So remember when practicing with your handsome Mr. M, and again, I'm not saying you can't use gear that you would prefer, but remember from the puppy's perspective, he's not trying to give you a hard time or not listen. He is just really confused as to what the heck is required of him as a dog in the human world. So a lot of times, ready, Max? He says, but I hear some woo-wooing. Is a lot of times we set up our puppies to at times have a really rough time with new things. Hi, handsome. I'm going to take his little leash off so he can have a little bit of free time. So if your babe is, again, struggling, he's not trying to give you a hard time. He's having a hard time. Ready, Max? So we want him to start thinking that, again, behavior is communication, and he's just trying to let you know what, this is out of my comfort range. I don't understand. So see me, think of him. Ready, Max? Come. Yes. As a furry little exchange student who, again, I know I've mentioned this before, doesn't understand what you want from him verbally, culturally, or physically. So again, don't view it as him being right or wrong or doing the wrong skill versus the right skill. View it as he's not doing well because he doesn't understand. So if the learner is having trouble, it normally means that the teacher is not giving information in a way that maybe the learner needs to learn. So this is where, oh, Max says when you gotta go, you gotta go. Max, ready? Come check in. Max is like, but I have to let everybody know who I am and how beautiful I am. Ready? Max. Don't worry, we'll clean that in a second. So remember how I've mentioned, going to the restroom could also be a little bit of a stress signal. Maybe he's a little bit flustered in the new environment. Maybe he wants to leave a little bit of odor behind, like some of the previous friends that have been here. So this is very much so like an indoor dog park. So don't worry if sometimes we have a little pee moment. I have plenty of cleaner, so no big deal. Oh, Mr. M, you getting full? We'll do a little check-in and we'll give Mr. M a little breather. But again, guys, check in if you have a question or concern. We're gonna give him a little break from this exercise and work another one in just a moment. But he did really nice.